Welcome back to the program. My name's Kerry Stevenson, and I'm delighted today that coming to me from the US is Keith Weiner. Keith is the CEO and founder of Monetary Metals. And for all of you naysayers out there that say gold does not give you a yield, well, Monetary Metals has found a way to give you a yield on your gold. We're going to talk about that a little later in the program. But first up, I want to ask Keith a few questions for all of you people out there that are wondering why you should even own gold. Excuse me, what's in it for you? And we'll start at the beginning. So Keith, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Let's explain first up to our listeners. We talk about currency and money. And obviously money is gold, the rest is credit. People talk about it as fiat currency. Could you just explain to our listeners what is fiat currency and where does gold fit, and why do people even need to even concern themselves with owning gold in this crazy COVID world?
Thanks, Kerry, for the introduction. I think the answer to why, there's a lot of answers to why I have gold, but maybe the simplest is there are times in the economy or times in your personal career where you want to take your marbles and go home. You do not want to be a creditor, a lender, either because you don't necessarily trust the system or because the interest rate that they're offering you is too low. Why take the risk? You want to take your marbles and go home. And and I'll get to fiat in a moment, but what the fiat credit system has done is disenfranchised the savers. There isn't any way to take your dollars home in dollar form, even if you have printed pieces of paper that say dollar on them, whether it's US dollar, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, British pound, whatever, it's still credit. You're actually still a creditor of the central bank, and the central bank uses that to extend credit onto the profligate welfare state spenders, which are the governments and also the commercial banks, and from there to all the cronies and all the bubbles that everybody's talking about, real estate, etc. If you want to not be a player and not be a participant, gold is the way to opt out. Maybe that's the simplest way to think of it. So I like to differentiate between fiat and irredeemable. The fiat just simply refers to the legal structure. They pass legal tender laws, and so by force, by government dictate, you are to use the Australian dollar inside of Australia, and they have all sorts of ways of making it difficult for you to use anything else. Not illegal precisely. If you want to buy property and you want to hand over a bag of gold coins, at least in the US, that's legal, I presume in Australia as well. But there are tax implications. There's all kinds of ways that makes this difficult. And then from an institutional investment standpoint, they define the dollar as the unit of value. And so if you own gold, now you have price risk and price volatility, and individual savers can choose whatever volatility that they're comfortable with. Institutional investors usually have either regulation or charter that kind of limits that. And so that keeps them out of gold for a lot of reasons. Irredeemable, unlike fiat, is really an economic concept. And so if you think about a very, very simple, Robinson Crusoe type economy, there's two people on this desert island, and one person says to the other, hey, I'm making a fishing net. Would you please lend me a couple of coconuts to eat while I'm making this net? And when the net is done, that's going to allow me to double my fishing yield, and then I'll pay you back some extra fish. So, you have the lending of the coconuts, and then at some point they repaying either in fish or in coconuts, with some sort of return. There's a physical return of something physical. And so that's a redeemable, they might write down on a piece of paper, I just gave you 2 coconuts, but the return of that is not in paper, but in something physical. And the monetary system until the early 20th century was based on this idea that if you extend credit, you're giving something physical, you're giving up a piece of gold or silver or something else potentially, and you're getting back something real. After 1933 in the United States, in each country on a slightly different time frame, but generally somewhere between the end of World War somewhere between the start of World War I and the 1930s, all the countries of the world, by and large, made their currencies irredeemable, at least to ordinary investors. So in the UK, they said, currency can only be redeemed for 400 ounces of gold. And so then, as now, 400 ounces of gold is basically not even a small fortune, a medium fortune. And so obviously the small saver was completely shut out of any kind of physical redemption. Ultra high net worth investors obviously could take home, that's a 12.5 kilo brick. That's a pretty good chunk of metal. I have a picture of me, I posted to Facebook, they took me in a vault holding with one hand one of these things, but that's a big chunk. Yeah, and they didn't want me to do it. They said, people can't hold that one-handed. Well, for everybody else in the UK, they were locked out. And then, certainly by the end of World War II, we have a new monetary regime called Bretton Woods. And all the countries of the world were to treat the US dollar as if it were gold. It isn't gold, but they were supposed to treat it as if it were gold. By the 1960s, a lot of countries, particularly France, realized actually it isn't gold after all. Who'd have thunk that? And so France began to redeem their dollars to get gold. US dollar at that point not being redeemable to US citizens, still being redeemable to foreign central banks and foreign governments. So France famously sailed a battleship into New York Harbor, offloaded pallets of $20 bills, and unloaded a much smaller number of smaller pallets of gold bricks to bring back to France. Partly that was a stunt, partly it was real. They really did want the gold. And then by 1971, Nixon declared, okay, that's it, it's irredeemable. So once it's irredeemable, that means nobody can get whatever credit they've extended, you can't get that back. You've given up real goods or real labor in exchange for a piece of paper, and you can't get that back from the issuer at any kind of contractually guaranteed terms. You can trade it in a market on the presumption that someone else will be willing to take it, but that isn't the same thing at all. And what we find is over time, those that are willing to take it are willing to take it on more and more adverse terms, adverse to you. So the purchasing power, so-called, declined for quite a while up until about 1981. What we see is that in a falling interest rate environment, which we've had since 1981 through present, then that tends to push prices down, or at least keep them very soft. Purchasing power isn't the major issue at the moment. The major issue at the moment is no one can earn any interest. So here you are lending. So when you deposit money in a bank, it isn't money, it's credit, to your comment earlier. And you don't have it in the bank, you have a credit against the bank. You are an unsecured creditor that hopefully the bank will make good on, and maybe they do and maybe they don't. And in exchange for which the bank is paying you what? In the United States, basically that. I think in Australia you have slightly higher interest rates, and maybe they give you something.
Not much. 0.25. The banks don't give you much.
0.25. So basically you could call that a return-free risk. Like you definitely are taking a risk to be exposed to that bank, and in exchange for which they're not giving you a return. And so if people want to take their marbles home, I love that expression, and not be taking that risk for zero return, you can't do that in dollars. Gold is the way to do that. And in a world where, just in the United States, the 12 months ending March 31, they're right before they passed this gigantic boondoggle stimulus, bailout, whatever you want to call it, the CARES Act. Right before that kicked in, the 12 months that ended at that point, the US federal government went deeper into debt by the tune of 1.7 trillion US dollars. Okay. In January, the 10-year treasury was paying 1.8%. Subsequent to COVID, they passed the so-called CARES Act, and they call it CARES because it shows how much they care about you, adding 2.8 trillion to the deficit. So 1.7 plus 2.8, we're at a $4.5 trillion deficit, from 1.7 to 4.5 trillion. But it gets worse because with the lockdown, of course, nobody's making any money. So I think tax revenues are going to drop by at least $1 trillion. So we're looking at $5.5 trillion deficit. And that's assuming they don't pass another stimulus, which they're sure to do. And right now they're only negotiating who's going to get how much of the loot. But let's call it a $6 trillion deficit. So the risk of being a lender to this system has just gone up dramatically. When the debt is now climbing by 6 trillion a year, and it doesn't reverse, that's a ratchet, it only goes in one direction. At the same time that the risk has gone up dramatically, the return has gone down dramatically. So we were at 3.2% you could get on the 10-year treasury in October 2018. to 1.8% in January of this year, down to, it hit 0.5%. And
Wow.
then it kind of bounced up and down a little bit. Yesterday was 0.7. I haven't seen it today, but with the stock market down so much, I'm sure it fell. Maybe a lot, maybe a little, but call it 0.5, 0.7, something like that. So they've taken away just about all of the return at the same time that they've amped up the risk. No wonder why the gold market's on fire. I mean, everybody can see this, not just the gold bugs, the mainstream people. So let's just take a look at Warren Buffett for a minute. Warren Buffett now, just the news came out of stale a couple of weeks ago, sold his banking stocks. This is everything from Visa and MasterCard to Goldman Sachs to buy Barrick, the biggest gold mining company. And what's interesting about this to me, and a lot of people look at it and say that means that Warren Buffett is bullish on gold. Yeah, okay, sort of, but I think you're missing the main part of the story. Here's a guy who's called gold a pet rock. Here's a guy who said gold is neither procreative nor productive. If you buy a lump of gold and stick it in your desk drawer, 20 years later, you still have that same lump of gold. It hasn't done anything for you. Has now decided to trade away his bank stocks, which are doing something, in exchange for gold or gold exposure, which he's already told us for many years he believes is doing nothing. Which means he's saying he thinks the bank stocks are going to do worse than the pet rock, which does nothing. Which means the bank stocks are going to do something negative. And that's very interesting. What does that mean? Well, we're going to find out as news events unfold, but that can't be good.
Well, I think I think Warren Buffett, he's a very savvy investor. I mean, it's as I think Rick Rule said recently. That's just it's not even a full stop. It's just a comma in his overall wealth, the investment into Barrick. But he looks at it as a business that is going to give him a return. It's whether it's gold or widgets or gadgets or tiddlywinks. It's not necessarily gold per se. He just sees it as a return. But I'd like to pick you up, if I could, Keith, on the fact that you say that gold is basically a strong price, because a lot of people look at how much does an ounce of gold cost me instead of how does it protect my purchasing power. And more recently, in the last few days, gold has come back off its all-time high to, I mean, when it hit 2,000 US dollars, mainstream start talking about it, everyone starts to talk about gold, and now everyone's backing off again because it's come back a little bit. What do you say to that sort of the challenge when the price in US fiat currency changes up, down, sideways?
I take a pretty broad view of that and say, there's always going to be jitter in the price, and there's always going to be people who think that they can trade that jitter, and some of the people who think they can trade that jitter actually can, and a lot of them, get caught wrong-sided. It's very difficult, and we don't try to do that. We just look at the broader pictures that the dollar, which is the thing people use to measure the gold, is both volatile and generally sinking, and sinking on purpose. If you read the Federal Reserve's website, the stated intention is so-called price stability. George Orwell would be spinning in his grave to be reading this, because price stability means relentless 2% debasement. 2% debasement every year from now until the end of time. And that's the Fed's official policy. So we're not talking about what happens if something goes wrong and the Fed loses control. We're talking about what happens if everything goes right, according to the Fed. They're debasing it. And so, people use the dollar to measure gold, but I like to use the analogy of, suppose you're standing on the deck of a ship, and you have two problems. One is the ship is slowly sinking by design. In other words, somebody's drilled a hole in the side of it and has told you his stated policy is 2% subsiding per year. And you're in a giant storm at sea, and the waves are going up and down 20 meters. And from the deck of the ship, you're looking at the lighthouse, saying, I think the lighthouse is going up. Why is the lighthouse going up? Well, if you can look at it objectively, the lighthouse isn't going anywhere. You're going down, up and down, but mostly down. And so the dollar being designed to lose value, why would anybody want to hold that? And why would anybody want to measure, anything in that? And so in terms of measurement, I like to use the analogy of, suppose you're a building engineer and you're building some sort of tall building, a skyscraper. Imagine if the meter changed lanes depending on what floor you're on. So you'd have to talk about floor adjusted meters. the way we talk about inflation-adjusted dollars. So on the ground floor, a meter is, you can't even see it. The video camera is not wide enough for me to, do a meter. But by the 50th floor, what if a meter was really, 20 centimeters?
Mm.
So imagine the complexities and the gyrations, and how could engineers even communicate with each other about this? And of course, the engineers are trying to write plans for the tradespeople to be cutting pieces of steel and whatnot. And then of course you have verticals. And so you're trying to, continuously adjust the meters to go up. It'd be a wonder if anything taller than 1 story could even stand, in a world like that. So of course we don't have that with a meter. The meter is very stable. It's only the money with which we measure investments and long time horizons and business enterprises, and we have all these gyrations and all this adjustment going on. And so it's really about, do you trust that system? Do you want to be a creditor to that system as you watch the debts going up exponentially and the return that you get, going down exponentially? And so what I would say to most people, to anybody, is keep some fraction of your wealth in gold, regardless of its price. And it's not a trading position. It's a core, piece of your savings that isn't going anywhere. And in a world where the big fear is things going down, then at least the gold isn't going down. And in terms of price measured in dollars, of course it can. The price of gold overshoots, it goes up and then it goes down. But it's really the dollar going down and sometimes up. And there's liquidity crunches, and then then the dollar goes up. And then it goes back down again, but the long-term trend is clearly down. So when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913,
Mm-hmm.
$1 was over 1,500 milligrams of gold.
Oh, wow. This is interesting. Yep. Okay.
Right, and now it's roughly 16 milligrams.
1,500
to
to 6.
16. So almost 1,000 to 1 drop in, I'm sorry, 100 to 1 drop in the value as measured in gold. So over longer terms, that's your answer to purchasing power and everything else. But in the shorter term, it's your safety that you're not being exposed to these incredible credit risks.
Well, you mentioned before, Keith, about liquidity. You mentioned about the amount of debt, up to 4.5 trillion and rising. Why wouldn't people then look at, because on the basis of that and the debasement of the currency, surely real assets, real estate, cars, art, gold, potentially, why wouldn't people just continue to invest in real estate? Because certainly here in Australia, that's it. Most people, that's all they talk about is real estate, real assets. Do you see that real assets will continue to rise? It's bad for savers, but it's good for spenders on real assets.
So, I guess I would say yes, properties and cars and antiques and old masters paintings, old whiskeys, those are all real assets or physical, tangible things. The difference between gold and all the other real assets is that gold is highly liquid. And so if you have to get in and out of gold, you take a very tiny loss. And if you want to get in and out of a property, what's your loss? 10% in a good market? It's huge, because you have all the property brokers, you have staging, and when you're buying it, very often you have to pay the ask price. When you're selling it, someone is going to give you their bid price. And then if the market becomes at all under pressure, then you can find that those bid-ask spreads widen to 25% or something like, or more. And gold doesn't have that. The bid-ask spread of gold is minuscule. And so that's basically a measure of liquidity.
Right.
Gold is liquid, even in a bad market. The price can go down, but it's always liquid. That's the first thing. The second thing is that properties are financed with credit, and since credit has become so cheap, the price of properties kind of is the inverse of the price of credit. As credit becomes cheaper and cheaper, properties become more and more expensive, to the point where they can hit ludicrous proportions. And so, yes, a property is a real thing. The property can't default, but when property prices go up like that, you can get an overbuilding of properties based not on real demand, but based on so-called investment demand. And when that trend has to reverse, and when credit conditions to the property market tighten up, and you get all that selling, you find out, how many of those properties were really needed, how many of them were so-called investment, which is really speculation. So if you want to speculate on an asset, and speculate on an asset which is very sensitive to loosening credit conditions, properties is a great way to go. But if you think that credit could tighten and that there's other problems coming, then the price of properties could fall, drastically. As I understand it, in Australia in 2008, 2009, you didn't really have a drop in real estate prices, which is extraordinary. And I live here in Arizona, and we're one of the epicenters of what had been the real estate bubble here. And property prices were down probably on average 50%.
Wow.
Depending on where, it could have been a lot more than that. Before that happened, people believed properties don't go down.
Yeah.
And then they were disabused of that notion violently in 2008, 2009. To this day, I don't think prices in Arizona really have quite recovered to where they had been in 2005. Some things, yes, sort of, but it's a very different market and it's a much weaker market than it had been. And so when is that coming to Australia? Nobody could predict.
No.
But at least that's a sort of Damocles hanging over the market. And if you're buying in, with that hanging over your head, you're taking an extraordinary risk.
Yeah, that's a bigger risk. Keith, I wanted to talk about the fact that, you were down here in Australia at our gold conference last October. Obviously, at that time, there was not even a sprinkle on the horizon that we were going to have this crazy chaos of this virus that's going around at the moment, which has shut things down. Do you think that we would be in the same position today? Or in other words, were we still in deep financial challenges before it hit, and this has just exasperated it? Or do you think we would have got here anyway? Because right now we are just awash in debt, and it keeps accumulating. And as you said before, the government stimulus checks keep coming out. The tax receipts are going down. It seems to me we're in it's almost like the vortex, which is pulling everybody into a bad end result.
Yeah, so I think for many decades, they were trying to stimulate the economy with pushing the interest rate down. So I like to put it in kind of a funny way that I think my American friends take one way and then the rest of the world take a slightly different way. And so they talk about the wealth effect, property prices and share prices go up, and so people feel wealthier. And I say that is the wealth effect is wealth, the way pasteurized, processed, homogenized American cheese food in a spray can is cheese. That's not cheese. So I recently, one of my articles I staged a little photo where I made a little plate and I had some tortilla chips with some of that stuff melted on it. I had some gummy worms. I had little cheese, like little puffs of rice or corn or whatever with the orange cheese powder on it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Other candies on there, and I said, "This is not a cheese and fruit plate with wine." Oh, and then I had they actually found this is just seltzer water, but I found a can of wine that I forget what it was, but it says can of wine on it, and I staged that photo, and I said, "This is not a cheese and fruit plate with wine." The way the wealth effect is not wealth. So that's what they do is they stimulate that. What does that do? So take Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin is $1,000, and you buy a Bitcoin because you think it's going to go up. And let's say you're right, and it does. So you sell it at 2,000. Let's assume you have the discipline to take your $1,000 of capital back, and now you have a $3,000 of spending money. Your purchasing power has gone up. So you spend that, and you buy some sort of vacation, whatever. The first point that I'd like to make is that in order for somebody to get purchasing power for nothing, that means that somebody else gets no purchasing power for something. Where is that purchasing power coming from? That is the capital, that's the life savings, that's the wealth accumulated by the buyer of that Bitcoin and or his family over years, decades, who knows how long to accumulate that wealth. Now, they didn't intend to spend it, and they certainly didn't give it to you to spend. That guy gave you the $2,000 because he thought Bitcoin's going to go to 4,000.
Right.
So let's say Bitcoin does go to 4,000, he sells it, he takes his $2,000 capital back, and now he can spend $2,000, so he can go on twice the bender that you did. You only had 1,000, he has 2. That person buys it for 4 because he thinks it's going to double, it's going to go to 8. So it goes to 8, he takes his 4,000 capital back, he now has $4,000, he can buy himself, a nice little, Sea-Doo or some sort of toy. So it keeps doubling, and people keep playing this. And then eventually, of course, it hits 20,000 or whatever it was in end of 2017. And everyone recognizes at that point, oh, woe is us. The price is falling, losses are being taken. And my argument is, no, the losses we're carrying every time somebody spent someone else's life savings given to them to spend because that person's betting on the price action. And so what this so-called wealth effect is, it's a process of conversion. And I use that word, I think this is an old English common law sense of the word. And in America, it's a little bit archaic. Conversion is like an illicit taking. It has sort of an unsavory connotation to it. It's a process of conversion of one person's savings into another person's income to be spent. That's what this wealth effect is people feel richer, they're spending it, but they're actually spending down capital. It's like eating the seed corn. And eventually there's a price to be paid. So we've had this falling interest rate from 1981 to present, and every time things are going up, it feels like we're getting richer. But what's happening is yields are going down. You may remember, was it 2015 that I gave my talk, Yield Purchasing Power?
I think it was 2015 or 2016. Yeah, it was back here. Yeah.
And I said, people look at the purchase power of something, but that's kind of like you inherit a family farm from grandfather. There's 2 ways to approach this. The purchasing power approach is you sell the back 40 off to a condominium developer. Then you chop down all the apple trees because they want to make cabinets, and fruitwood cabinets are kind of hip. Then you tear down all the barns because everybody wants flooring made out of old barn wood. You even dismantle the tractors so some artist can make some sort of objet d'art to put an atrium in this condominium, and you're selling off, you're liquidating the farm in order to buy groceries. And there's, and meanwhile, the price of all those pieces of the farm is going up and up and up, and you feel that's great. Eventually, you run out of farm, right? And now what do? And the yield purchasing power is saying, okay, how much food could you grow by operating the farm as it's intended to be, rather than by liquidating the farm and trading the farm literally bit by bit for groceries. The farm should have a perennial yield of crops that is not a matter of liquidating the capital. But as the interest rate is falling, the yield that every bit of farmland is getting, it almost be like if we had some sort of climate disaster of the sort that everybody was afraid of in the 1970s, if you remember, global cooling. And there's going to be winter, nuclear winter. So just imagine farmland, in the extreme south of Australia, the extreme north of Europe, bit by bit, the glaciers are just advancing. And what had been farmland last year is now covered in permafrost and can't grow anything. So the farmland is shrinking, and the next few miles of farmland have a much more marginal yield because you have all the ice that's close by and the cold that's radiating off of it. Crops aren't doing very well. And little by little, everything is shrinking in terms of yield. Well, that's what's going on in the financial world with all this falling of the interest rate. So on the one hand, you can sell your farm for more and more groceries. On the other hand, if you try to operate your farm, you get less and less food out of it. And so the entire world is plunged into this liquidation mode. Very dangerous phenomenon. So then we get to, let's call it February 2020, right before the virus hit. I happen to have been in Sydney and in Asia. I returned to the US February 29. That was my last travel. And in Asia, the airports were completely empty. Flights were 80% empty. It was eerie. And I said, there's COVID here in Asia, but the airport is the last place you'd catch it because there's nobody here. I mean, empty lines at border control and all the stuff. The restaurants were dying. They had 50% off signs on lobster and king crab legs and all that stuff at Jewel, the food court in the Jewel Mall at Changi Airport in Singapore. But in Australia, everything was still normal. In the US, everything was still normal, for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then boom. But at that moment in time, what we'd been doing for 40 years was absolutely, catching up to us at some rate, and that is trading capital for debt. Consuming capital, replacing it with a piece of paper that says, "Oh yeah, I'll get you back," but it's irredeemable, so I never actually have to get you back. And so it's accumulating, accumulating, and accumulating, and there's various ways you can see it. And the interest rate, now here's a different way of looking at the interest rate. Why, if the economy is so good, why do businesses not bid up the price of credit?
Yeah.
Why do they only take credit on a downtick in rates? In other words, I have a business, you're coming to me and saying, you're the bank or you're the market, I'll give you credit. And I say, what's the rate? And you say 3%. And I say, nothing doing. Come back when you're on a downtick. I'm only going to be bribed if you come down. In the US, they're still advertising now, but even in February, buy a new car with 0% interest rate for 72 months. And that was fairly typical across a lot of brands. It wasn't just, well, everyone knows that Chevy is, in trouble, or Ford or whatever. The Japanese, the Koreans, some of the European brands, 0% for 72 months. And even when they thought that they were going to raise interest rates, remember Janet Yellen started with that in 2015, 2016, 2017, everyone said rates are going to rise. I said, no way. And one way you could see it is in the cars. So as the rate was going up, the car companies had an increasing cost to subsidize you with 0%. And all the car companies took that increasing cost, they took that hit to their bottom line, and they did it anyway, because they knew if they try to say, we're going to sell you a car and we'll give you 4% for 72 months, that sales volume would have dropped off a cliff. So the consumer of the car is also saying, I'm only taking credit if you bribe me by coming down in rate. Obviously in Europe it's negative, in Japan it's negative, Scandinavia it's negative, in the US now it's basically zero.
Do you think globally it will go negative, and does that then mean people will go into even higher debt? And do we just keep kicking the can down the road and the numbers just keep exploding? No one cares about gold. We'll just keep borrowing until kingdom come.
Well, I believe it was Lady Thatcher who said the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. So there is a finite limit to this. And I have some debates on Twitter, particularly with some of these so-called modern monetary theory people. And they basically are saying there's no limit. Or, if you think of it as you're pouring more and more water into the bathroom sink, the only limit is if the sink overflows, which to them is this vague notion of maybe you get too much inflation, whatever that means. But eventually you consume all the capital that can be consumed. And then next time you go to kick that can, it turns out to be a nuclear bomb and it blows up and it destroys your civilization. So the dollar collapse, and we're on the trajectory for that to occur. When that occurs, that is the wipeout of civilization, because the dollar's made it profitable to consume capital. That farm analogy is not hypothetical. In various talks I've given, we've looked at all kinds of different businesses that are, slowly consuming their capital. And when the capital is precious and it's hard to accumulate, and it takes years and it takes savings and it takes tightening the belt. When that's all gone, what we're going to find is we can't produce food and energy at the scale we need to keep everything going, and then you get collapse. And the only comparable that I can really point to historically is 476 AD, when Rome collapsed.
Wow. Okay.
So the population of the city of Rome had been over 1 million people, and then after the collapse, it was like 8,000. So 92%. Some of them might have escaped to a farm somewhere in southern France, but most of them, would have perished. It's going to be worse this time because back in Roman times, everybody still had direct connections to the land and to agriculture. They didn't produce food at industrial scale with giant machines that can till and plant 50-meter swaths at a time, and one guy sitting in an air-conditioned cab, playing iTunes, while this machine is on a laser guided, GPS guided, automatic, setting, everything was labor intensive, it took a lot of land, everybody was involved in it. And so agriculture was still in everybody's DNA. Today, very, very few people have anything to do with agriculture. And those who do know how to operate giant tractors that are GPS guided. They don't know anything about plowing soil with a mule or a pair of oxen and a plowshare. And they don't know anything about, all those things. And so when we can't produce food at industrial scale, and when oil and electricity stop, you know, look at every city is going to be a death zone. So,
Keith, that's an extraordinarily bleak, horrendous outlook. Do you? And people have said this in the past that things are going to be very bleak. Do you truly believe that is where we're headed, to a fiat monetary collapse, to a collapse in society as we see it today? And if that is the case, how are you going to protect yourself and your family? And what do you suggest people can do to, I guess, protect themselves from potentially what's coming, but what people are going, not listening, not listening?
well, it's not much help for the people that aren't listening. So,
Yeah,
direct my comments to the people who want to listen.
yeah, absolutely.
So, the first part of your question was, do I truly believe it? My background and my training is as an engineer, and computer software specifically. So I'll give sort of two lines of computer code that I think most people can understand, and that is line one, do something; line two, go to one. So you have an infinite loop, and when you have debugged software that gets infinite loops, you realize that if there's not a terminating condition, if there's no if then that says, okay, if this condition occurs, then get out. If it's always just go back and do the same thing over and over, then that will continue to go until either the end of time or it runs out of resources or runs out of something. So we now have this infinite loop in the economy. It's profitable to consume capital. That is what this wealth effect is. If something's profitable, people will do more and more of it, and there's no escape condition. So if you look at it that way, you say, this is mathematics. This has nothing to do with who's elected next. I know in Australia, you have the Labour Party and you have the Conservative Party. Here we have the Republicans and the Democrats. It doesn't matter who's elected next. And the Congress as well, or your parliament, it doesn't matter, because the system is wired the way it is, it operates the way it operates, and it's moving forward and consuming capital. So yes, I do. Personally, I looked at where in the world I might want to move, and I visited a lot of countries all over the place. And I think people, and there's a lot of people who write about this stuff, certainly much more than I do. I think people confuse, where would you want to live if the United States is becoming slightly less fun to be in, and you're a wealthy expat, and the world is basically holding together, but the economy is kind of crap? Where would you want to live? And then you say, well, London's a nice place, Singapore is kind of fun, or Kuala Lumpur, Auckland. There's a lot of places that are pretty cool. But if we're really talking about collapse, then I think all that's off the table, and you got to say, well, you have to be in some place that has abundant rainfall, not too hot because you're not going to have air conditioning. Phoenix here, I mean, it's still, and we're into what should be our cooler weather at this point. It's going to be 113 degrees Fahrenheit tomorrow. I'm sorry, Saturday.
Whoa.
What is that in centigrade? 45 or something?
45, 46.
It's like opening an oven door and just sticking your head in and just letting that hot, except add some dust to it. So it's a dusty, hot, furnace. So you couldn't be here, even if there was water. It would just be an unpleasant place to be. So I had looked at the South Island of New Zealand. Said, okay, well, you have around Dunedin, you have 1.5 meters, I think, of annual rainfall. So you don't need pumps to get water. It falls out of the sky for free. The soil is fertile. You can have all kinds of crops. You can have obviously sheep and cattle, which they do, and that would be a place to go. And then I realized, first of all, you're in the middle of remote nowhere, 50 kilometers out of Dunedin. The nearest town, you'd be lucky if you can get a hamburger and a beer. And secondly, in this collapsed world, we're talking about, at best, so forget Mad Max and what that looked like. At best, you're talking about a return to 17th century agricultural. methods, assuming you even know those methods, which most people don't, that was a world where life expectancy was like 40, and people that are older than 40 are kind of past their, shelf life, because it's backbreaking labor 6.5 days a week to eke out some bare subsistence living out of agriculture. And so I looked at that and I said, do I want, to try to eke out some sort of subsistence in that kind of world? I said, you know what? That doesn't sound like any fun, even assuming I would survive in it. No pharmaceuticals, obviously, just backbreaking labor to hopefully get 12 or 1,500 calories a day. And so I decided, and what my game plan is, and this kind of segues to monetary metals, is I said, is there a way that I can avert this Armageddon rather than plan to live in the new dark ages? Can we avert the dark ages? Life is pretty pleasant, certainly for me right now. If I can help the civilizations hold together, maybe that's what I want to do. And so I'm all in on trying to avert that. I'm not planning to do well, whatever well means in a 17th century society. I'm not planning to do well in that. I'm planning to try to hold things.
Keith, people won't know this about you, but you actually had a very successful software company. You sold it, and then you studied monetary economics, and you have a wealth of knowledge in that area. I want to go back to, and this is my final question. I want to go back to the fact that technology has pervaded all parts of society, and surely, even with the sort of collapse that you're talking about, technology can help us. When we talk agriculture, we can print food. I mean, my listeners will be very surprised, but I ate a fake burger the other day, and it was okay. It was a plant-based burger. Don't you look at the technology that society is managing to potentially pull us through this?
Well, when they fail to be able to keep producing oil and electricity, all that technology will turn off and not be turned on again. So I know I don't. I mean, there are certain technologies maybe, but I think all of that technology largely goes away. The other, so when I have my monetary economics hat on, there's a clarity because it's really, again, just projecting forward the math and understanding that something's an infinite loop. When I put my social thinking hat on, then there's a lot of uncertainty because who knows what people are going to do and how events could play out. And that's all kind of educated guesswork. But one of the challenges with all this is that there's a pretty small number of, largely they're engineers, who understand how our world, like all the infrastructure, how it really works, how to keep the sewer system running, and how to keep the water pipes pumping, and how to keep the electric grid going. And in a Mad Max kind of world, these are not the people that are going to be likely to survive. These are usually nerds. These aren't the ones that are out there training in militias with, AR-15s and AK-47s or whatever. These are pudgy, geeks. And, if enough of them were to perish in whatever chaos is coming, you couldn't restart the electric grid, even if you wanted to. Problem number one. Problem number two, the way this capital consumption works is it looks a lot like neglect. So Venezuela is a very instructional example because basically the power went off. I haven't read too much. This is whatever 6 or 8 months ago now. I haven't read too much since then, but I'm gathering they probably didn't really get it back on as a grid anymore. And the reason is for decades, what socialism does is it sucks all the capital out and diverts it into, welfare programs for whoever the politically, whoever the voting bloc is. And so what that means in a power grid is every time, there's all kinds of meters that measure current and thermal load and all that. Every time something like that fails, they don't replace it. They just say, well, that little bit, we can't measure it anymore. And there's all kinds of switches and shunts and other things that react to if the load gets too high, something's click over there. One by one, the switches rust or whatever happens to them, corrode, and they replace them with a copper bus bar because they don't have the money to replace, these are expensive parts. You got to buy them from the US or Germany or whatever. And so little by little, the grid becomes less and less intelligent. It doesn't really know what's going on anymore. And it doesn't even have the switches It's more sort of rigid and fixated. Well, when the thing finally goes down, now, okay, how do you deal with this? Even assuming you had all the engineers, Venezuela, of course, had a brain drain, and all the engineers are fleeing, had been fleeing for decades. But even assuming you have the engineers, when you want to get the grid back online, you have to know precisely where the faults are. And you have to take those faults offline and only have a grid that there's no faults to bring that up. Well, if all of your sensors or half your sensors are rotten and misleading or frozen, you don't even know that anymore. And you don't even have the switches and relays even to shunt off the load to here and not there. And so bringing the grid back online becomes impossible. Essentially, you have to rebuild it from scratch. In the middle of all the rest of the chaos, it ain't gonna happen.
So just bringing it back to a very simplistic, because we'll have to finish up in a minute. I really want people to understand where they can see more of your writings. Bringing it back to a simplistic overview, I guess, what you're saying at the moment is that with all this government stimulus, with all this debt that will never be repaid, that we're heading down the socialism route, which will ultimately do more damage to society that we're not prepared for. Would that be?
Well, I'm saying this is the socialism. This is the so-called soft socialism. It's not a guard at every corner with a machine gun and bullets on a bandolier saying, let me see a papers, although we have that now with the virus. This is the soft socialism of a central planner, a Gosplan, running the central bank, directing credit decisions and making it profitable to consume the capital. And so what I'm talking about is a process. So capital, think of capital as what gives leverage to human effort and human productivity. We don't work any harder today than they did in the ancient world. Let's say, the people at the river delta and the Nile before Egypt rose as a civilization. So what is that, 8,000 years ago or something like that? We don't work any harder now than they did then. We just have more leverage, and the leverage is the capital base. So we're standing atop this enormous edifice of capital, and we're hacking away at it, with axes and chainsaws, and little bits of it we're hollowing it out. Eventually, the last, it's like the last straw analogy, the last little chip, the thing crumbles and it comes down. At that point, there's nothing that anybody can do anymore. You've killed it. And so that's the process that we're in the middle of right now. And unless that process is checked, it's bleak, no doubt about it, but it's inevitable. We've made it profitable to consume capital. That is such a profound statement. So in a free market, profit comes from adding value, creating something. Making a profit, that means necessarily that you're doing something positive. But to the extent that the government takes over various pieces of the economy, and now you replace market with central planning, then to make a profit might mean you're adding value and creating something productive, or it might mean you're destroying value, but the government has distorted things so that destruction is actually creating value. One of the things that everybody was aware of in the 1970s, if you ran a business that was buying raw materials and then manufacturing them into finished goods, the longer that you took during your process, the more money you made. Think about how perverse that is for a minute. So if you ran an efficient business and you got your raw material into your factory, produced your thing, and sold it same day or next day, you made very little money. If you managed to slow that down for 6 months, you made enormous amounts of money. Why? Because of inflation.
Of course.
So you borrow $1,000, you buy $1,000 worth of copper, and then over a 6-month period, you manufacture them into widgets that you're now selling for $10,000 because of inflation. This is very perverse. The longer you take in manufacturing, the less value you're adding, and arguably you're subtracting value because it's the time value to the money you're borrowing. But because of that price inflation, you appear in dollar-denominated books to be very profitable. What is profitable will be scaled up. That's what enterprises do. That's why people either love or hate corporations. They're really good at scaling things up if it's profitable. So the government has made it profitable to consume capital, whether it's in the Bitcoin market, the shares market, the properties market, the silver market from 2009 to 2011, even the gold market, whatever market something's going up, there's capital consumption going on, and the government and the Fed have made it profitable to do so. And that's why I'm certain of my conclusion.
Well, Keith, it's been absolutely fabulous to chat to you today. I wish we could keep going, but we are going to finish. But before we do, you do a lot of writing. You've got some blogs, some videos. I know that there's a video on your website when you spoke at the Harvard Club, which I will put the link to in the comments below, because I think that that's something people should listen to, because it's all about understanding where we are and, you know, what you can do best now in this crazy, chaotic world. Keith, if you could just let our listeners know how they can find some of your writings, what you do, and your Twitter handle, etc.
So monetary metals, we pay interest on gold and silver.
Yes, please. Let's go. Interest on gold. All those people out there that say that there's no interest on gold, have a listen.
There is. So we wrote an open letter to Warren Buffett, and we said, "You said that gold doesn't pay interest. You were correct, but with due respect, no longer. Now it is possible to get interest on gold." Our website is monetary-metals.com. My Twitter handle is at kweiner01. Facebook, I think I'm Keith.Weiner5.
I'll put all those links below as well.
Most of my writings, certainly my monetary writings, are at monetary-metals.com, and then click on economics, and then both the market report and blog have. I've been a pretty prolific writer. There's probably a couple thousand articles there. I don't generally repeat myself, so each one's saying something different. So there's a lot of stuff there.
Keith, if people want to get a return on gold, what's the process? Is it an easy process, or how does that work?
As easy as the regulators allow anybody to make it. I mean, open an account. We have to do our standard anti-money laundering check on people, but other than that, open an account, and then you can either send us dollars and buy the gold through us, or you can send us the gold. We have partners, vaults in a lot of countries around the world, including Australia. We partner with ABC Bullion in Sydney, so people can bring their gold to ABC, or if it's already there, transfer it to us, and then they can participate and they can get some interest on their gold.
What a great thing, and a great way to finish up this conversation. Keith Weiner, thank you so much for talking to us today, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. And I hope not in a worse world than we are in at the moment.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.